to my channel. I hope that you're doing well. Welcome to another video, and welcome to, a not as exciting video as usual. Today I'm going to be talking about my most disappointing and worst books that I read in 2020. Now, I will say that out of all of the books that I read this year, I read over 190 books this year, and I read some really amazing books. I read some middle-of-the-road books, and unfortunately, I did read some books that were very disappointing and all around just terrible reads. And I hate to say that because I want to love all books and I want to be able to share the books that I do love with you guys, but I know that a lot of people look forward to this video. This is also a video that I like to see other booktubers make, just so I know which books might not be for me. Now, reading is totally subjective, and if you love some of the books that I talk about today, that is nothing against you or your reading taste. I personally just didn't love them. But again, reading is subjective. You're allowed to like what you like, and I'm allowed to dislike what you like. So if this is going to upset you in any way, I apologize, but I will be sharing my opinions, and hopefully you guys will find this somewhat entertaining. So today I'm going to be talking about a few books that just were disappointing, not necessarily the worst books that I read this year. They were just disappointing. Either I was expecting a lot from them, or the overall book was just not what I wanted it to be. And then from there, we're going to talk about my worst books of 2020. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. And I'm just going to start this off by saying that I don't feel like getting any of these books out. Most of them I don't own, actually, and some of them I do own, but they're in my unhaul pile and I don't want to get them out, and the rest I'm just too lazy. So I don't know if that makes me a lazy booktuber or what, but I'll put the pictures up on the screen for you so you guys can see which books I'm talking about, but we're just gonna talk about them and not hold them up because I just don't friggin' feel like it. So the first section of books we're going to talk about are the books that I was disappointed by, and we're going to kick this off with The Selection by Kira Cass. I expected so much more from these books. I wanted all of the feels, and I wanted all of the beauty of a trashy YA novel, and I got some of it, but I didn't get all of it. I think that the book was a little strange. I think the pacing was a little bit off. I didn't absolutely love the characters going in. I think that it could be potentially a series that I really love as I continue on with the series, but I just think the book in and of itself wasn't my favorite book that I've ever read. There are some things that I did like about this book in particular. I like the setting. I like that it was Bachelorette style. I love The Bachelorette or The Bachelor, and I think they're such fun shows. So the idea of this being set in that setting was really intriguing, and I did really enjoy that aspect. It just wasn't necessarily a book that overall came together for me. I think that the ending was really weird. I know that it's supposed to follow, I think it's supposed to follow, at least based on off of the ending of the first book, the entire journey that America goes through in regards to her Bachelorette experience or the selection experience. And I just think that it ended off on a weird place. I don't think that it was a proper cliffhanger. I don't think it was a proper ending, and for that reason the ending really disappointed me, and I was expecting so much more. That being said, I will continue on with the series. I think that it has the potential to be really good. It just wasn't my favorite. Alright, up next we're going to talk about Horrified by Katrina Leno. Honestly, I really debated on this being in my worst books of 2020 or my most disappointing books of 2020 because it wasn't great. I rated this a 3-star, and I'm not really sure if I am happy with that rating. It might be around a 2.5. I haven't really decided, but I kept it in the most disappointing because I couldn't make up my mind. And the reason I didn't like this was, first of all, it was strange. And I'm not afraid of weird books. I think that adding something weird to your book is a cool thing to do. It just wasn't my type of weird that I particularly liked. I didn't care for the ending. Really at all. I felt like the ending made this book so pointless. You don't really get a conclusion. You don't get answers. You don't get the rest of the arc for some of the characters that were in this book. And it just didn't feel very well-rounded. And for that reason, I really didn't like it. I wasn't scared in this book one time. And it's supposed to be a horror novel. Granted, it is YA, so I can kind of cut it some slack for that. But I feel like if you are going to go for the creepy, scary, all-around ominous vibes, you gotta give me that. And I just didn't get it. And then on top of that, I just felt like the characters in and of themselves were not very well developed. I don't think the arcs of any of the characters really made sense. I felt like the side characters that were in this book could completely have been written out and it wouldn't have made a difference. Like, zero difference at all. There are a couple of indiscrepancies in regards to the writing and the storyline that I didn't love, and it it just wasn't great. It just wasn't great. I really wish it was better because I really want to love Katrina Leno's writing, so I will give her another chance in regards to books. I do think on my list, I want to read Summer of Salt, which I believe is written by her, so I will definitely give that a chance. Horror just wasn't it for me. All right, up next, we're going to talk about A Phoenix First Must Burn, and this is an anthology by 15, I don't know if it's 12 or 15, Black female authors that were writing about Black fantasy and sci-fi characters, and Black girl magic, which in and of itself sounds amazing, but I just didn't love it. I wanted to. I gave it a 3-star. It's a middle of the road book. It's not bad by any means. It just wasn't amazing like I thought it was going to be. I mean, Black girl magic, written by 15 Black authors that were talking about female empowerment, and the concept was amazing, and there were some really, really good stories in there. The stories written by Elizabeth Acevedo was amazing. The story written by E.B. Zavoy was really good. I liked Patrice Caldwell's story as well. Like, there were some good ones in there, but some of the other ones fell really flat. And I think that the problem with anthologies is, for me, I am a middle of the story type of person. Like, I don't really care for the beginning and I don't really care for the ending, but I love the middle bits. And with an anthology being an anthology, all of the stories being super short, you don't get a lot of that middle area. You get the beginning, you get a small in the middle type of like scene, and then you get the end, and then you're on to the next story. So I didn't really get a chance to connect with the characters, with the stories, with the magic systems, with the world that they were living in, and I just didn't have the connection that I would have wanted to. So I think that is the reason why I didn't love it. But that was my first anthology and the first short story collection that changed the storyline and the time setting and everything like that, the characters. So I think that going into my next anthology, I will be a little bit more open-minded. But yeah, I was disappointed by this book overall, and I was really hoping for a lot more than what I got. Okay, up next, we're going to talk about Cinderella Is Dead by Kaylanisimplyme. And I actually don't own this book anymore. I gave this to Mike because he wanted to read it. And I think that this book could have been really good. I think that I liked the idea of it. I liked the premise. I just don't think that it was fully fleshed out in the ways that I would have wanted. Also, I felt that the story was super predictable, as well as the love triangle, the love interest in this book wasn't overly believable and understandable. This is a female-female romance, which I think is amazing. I love that about the book. I love that the book is super feminist and is super about women's empowerment and standing up for what's right in regards to the decisions that women should make for their lives. And I think that that was really awesome, and that's a really big part of the book, which is amazing. But the fantasy aspects, the predictability of the storyline, the big bad in the end was all just very predictable for me. I called it from the beginning, and when it ended up playing into fruition, I was just really disappointed that I was able to figure it out from the first couple of chapters. So it wasn't my favorite book. I think that if you really like Cinderella and you really want to read a more remixed version of the actual story, I think this could be a really fun read for you. I was reading it for a book club, and so I think I read a little bit too much into the book, which hindered my enjoyment of it quite a bit. I think that if I was reading this book just for myself, just for enjoyment, I would have changed my thoughts a little bit, but I spent so much time focusing on the story and thinking about things that I could talk about for this book club that I read too much into it, and I was picking up all the plot holes, all the little things that should have been put together and fleshed out a little bit more that just weren't. And so for that, I didn't enjoy it as much, and so it was quite disappointing. I think I ended up giving this book about a 3-star, which is, again, not bad, just not my favorite. All right, up next, I want to talk about a very old school YA contemporary, and that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I'm actually sad to say that I was disappointed by this book. I think that my experience of the book was hindered a little bit by the fact that I did indeed watch the movie before I read the book, and that just made the experience of reading this book extremely boring. And I've reread books in the past, so I don't think that's all of it. I just think that that is some of it, because I have reread books and really enjoyed my rereading experience, knowing what's going to happen in a story and still enjoying it. I don't think that that has anything to do with the fact that I didn't absolutely love it. I just think that part of the reason why I didn't love it as much with my first reading experience is I already knew what was going to happen, so that made the story just a little bit more non-exciting. I also didn't care for the writing. I felt that it was a little dry. Overall, the book was just a big disappointment for me. I think I ended up giving this, again, a 3-star. Again, middle of the road book. I think that it does have some good qualities. I like the talk of death and morality in this book, but I just don't think that it was the best book that I've ever read. It did make me cry though, so, but I don't think that's any, I don't think there's anything I can say about a book because I cry over Happy Honda commercials, so that's not really a judgment of whether the book is good because I can literally cry at the drop of a dime. But overall, if the book was okay, it just wasn't my favorite thing that I have read this year by far. All right, the last book that we're going to talk about in the disappointing category is a book that I am very, very, very sad to say is on this list. And this is one of the books that I have to preface this by saying I gave this book a 4-star. I really enjoyed the book. But the second book in the series happened to be just a little bit more disappointing than I would have wanted because the first book ended up on my favorites of the year list. And that is The Devil's Thief by Lisa Maxwell. I loved the first book. I think that the series in its entirety is really amazing and I 100% recommend it. But after reading the first book and having such book hangover and loving where the story went, I just was really underwhelmed by the second book. It was a lot of walking around and not really doing much and a lot of repetitive information that I just didn't feel like the storyline needed. I wanted a lot more action and wow factor from the second book that I just didn't get, and I felt like the book really suffered from second book syndrome, where it's really a setup for what's going to come for the rest of the series, and I was just hoping that I was going to get a lot more than I did. The second book really centers around finding these artifacts that are really important to this world, and there are several artifacts that these characters are supposed to be finding, and this book only focused on one, and it just left so much more to be questioned throughout the book, and it didn't give me a lot to go off of. So I was quite disappointed by the book in and of itself, but I do think the book is still amazing. I still gave it a 4-star. It was quite enjoyable to read. I just wanted a little bit more than what I got, and therefore it was a disappointment for a book, for the first book being one of my favorite books of the year. So that being said, loved it, but not my favorite book in this series so far. All right, let's move on to the worst book of 2020. I have quite a long list here, so I'm going to try to go through these rather quickly because I don't want to sit here and bash them all day because that's just not very fun for the authors and people that put their hard work into these, but these are books I just didn't love. So let's go ahead and talk about them very quickly. All right, up first, we're going to talk about Unbirthday by Liz Braswell. This is one of the books in the Twisted Tales series. It's the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland book, and I think my non-enjoyment of this book has a lot to do with the fact that I didn't enjoy the original Alice story. I think I might as well just talk about the two Alice books that are on this list, and that is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Unbirthday. I think that both of the books were just too nonsensical for me. I get that the purpose of the book is to be nonsensical and whimsical and weird, and I get that, but I watched the movies and loved the movies, and the movies don't make sense either, but I just didn't love the storytelling aspect of these books. The problem that I had with Unbirthday, let's talk about that one first, is the fact that it just wasn't a Twisted Tale. I felt like it was more of a sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland because the book is set 18 years in the future. I'm sorry, 8 years in the future. She's now 18 or 19 from when the original story took place, and she's going back into Wonderland to save the world. And it just didn't feel like a Twisted Tale. It didn't feel like the story was being retold. It just felt like the story was being continued on from where they left off, and I didn't like the first one. So if I didn't like the first one, why would I want to read a sequel of the second one? I went into this book not thinking about the fact that it could be that way because all of the other Twisted Tales that I have read didn't follow that fashion. They were definitely a retelling of the original story. And so I think that that really changed my experience of reading this book. But also, aside from that, I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the setting, I didn't like the constant back and forth between Wonderland and the real world, and the only reason I gave this book a 3-star is because one of the characters in this book, his name is Katz, and I really loved his character. I thought that out of all of the characters in this book, he was well done, and he wasn't even in it that much. So that's pretty sad to say, but I just didn't love it. Aside from that, let's talk about Alice really quick. Again, I think that Alice was just too nonsensical for me to absolutely love. I think that there are some things that I can totally see why people would love this classic, and I can understand why it's a classic and the way that it's told and the illustrations and all of that stuff. I think that is really fun. I just think the book wasn't for me, but I can definitely see why people love it. And that's always been my disclaimer talking about this book and talking about the fact that I don't love it, is I can see why people love it, I just didn't. So, I'm going to talk about that as my worst book of the year, those two at least. Let's move on to some other ones. A next one that I'm going to talk about is Mermaid Moon by Suzanne Colquitt. I read this for my book club pick back in October, maybe? I can't remember exactly which month. Oh, it had to be before October, so maybe September. Yeah, September. and it wasn't good. I don't think anybody in the Discord actually loved the book. I know some people liked it, but I'm not sure I talked to anybody that loved it. I just felt like the story was super, super underdeveloped. It was supposed to be a Little Mermaid retelling, and you got some of those aspects, definitely. You have a girl going to land, the prince that they're supposed to fall in love with. You have the evil sea witch. All of those things are totally valid, but I just didn't like it. It wasn't good. I was reading the book and I was listening to the audiobook, and I was like 250 pages in and nothing happened. Zero. Like, nothing had progressed any way, shape, or form, and it just was so boring. Like, the characters weren't overly developed, the storyline wasn't good, it was super flowery, which I like flowery books, but if you're not gonna have any basis to your flowery content, what is the point of reading it? And for it being a Little Mermaid retelling, which is one of my favorite Disney movies of all time, it was a huge letdown, and I really didn't enjoy it. I gave this book a 2-star. It was not enjoyable. It's sad because the book itself is gorgeous. It came with these beautiful blue sprayed edges. The dust jacket, underneath the dust jacket, was beautiful. Like, it was a gorgeous book, but the inside definitely didn't match the outside, so I'm really sad about that. Okay, up next we're going to talk about The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I did talk about this in my best audiobooks of the year list because the audiobook of this was fantastic. The book itself was not great. I don't know if it was just me not jiving with N.K. Jemisin's writing style. I don't know if I just didn't like the total book like being fleshed out, because I think that the concept of this book is really amazing. I just don't think that it was fleshed out well. I felt like the author really focused on more characters, some characters more than others, and I just didn't love how the ending ended up playing out. I felt like it was really, really easy and convenient. Everything kind of just fell into place for all of the characters. You built this whole bad guy in the book up to the very end, and there wasn't really this big fight scene. It was really simple, really easy. They won per se, and it just didn't feel very complete. However, that being said, the audiobook was incredible. They put so much time and effort into making that audiobook what it was, and it was incredible. It was the only reason I finished the book. Again, I read this for a book club. I read this for the Shelf Space book club with Jessie May, and I felt like a lot of people in the chat didn't love this book either, so I feel like I'm not alone on that one. I know some people that absolutely loved it, but it just wasn't the book for me. But if you like the idea of New York City coming to life and each borough having their own personality, you might really enjoy this book. It just wasn't the book for me. Up next, we're going to talk about a graphic novel, and that is Archie Volume 1. I don't remember who the author is, but I will put it all up on the screen for you so that you can see the cover. I just didn't love it. I did watch some episodes of Riverdale, and I was really enjoying what I was watching when I watched it, and this being a graphic novel about Riverdale, not the TV show adaptation, but it's more of like the everyday lifestyle stuff of Riverdale. It just wasn't entertaining. I don't think that it was well put together. I didn't care for the art style. I didn't care for the characters. It just felt very confusing. It was very sporadic, very jumpy. I was confused most of the time while reading it. It just didn't feel like an overly well put together book. I think that's a lot of the reasons why these books ended up on my worst list in 2020. It's just I didn't feel that they were very well put together. I think that they were lacking something or missing something in order to make them fully fleshed out, and this is the same experience that I had with Archie Volume 1. I do have the second book in my on my TBR that I do plan on reading, just so I can say that I read it, and I will probably end up unhauling it, but I haven't decided on if I'm going to read it for sure yet. And I just wish I loved it more. I think that it had a lot of potential to be really great, and it just wasn't what I wanted it to be, and so that therefore it ended up on this list. All right, the next book I'm going to talk about is probably the worst book that I read all year, and I probably should have talked about this one last, but it ended up on my list in the middle. So this was definitely the only book I think that I rated a 1-star and had no qualms about it and did not regret it in the slightest, and that is Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Like, who the fuck read this book as an editor or as a publisher and was like, yeah, let's do that? Because it made no sense. No sense. There was no ending. There was no explanation. There was no answers. I spent the entire book thinking, okay, it's not great, but it's fine. When I get to the end, it'll all make sense because I'll know why all of this happened and why these people were doing such weird things. But did I get the answer? Absolutely freaking not. No, I got no answers. I got nothing. I got nothing. And I just didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. It was basically about the end of the world coming, and these characters were supposed to sacrifice themselves in order to save the world. And basically just some weird shit was happening in that book. I did like the fact that it had male representation in there, but other than that, the book was a big freaking fail. It was just terrible. I don't wish it on anybody. Please don't read it. This is probably the only book that I would recommend you don't read because it just wasn't good. It just wasn't good. Moving on. All right, up next, we're going to talk about some Stephen King. And I will say, I don't think this is the best place that I could have started with Stephen King because this book was fucking weird. And that is Elevation by Stephen King. And I'm just going to explain the premise to you, and then you can understand why I thought it was weird. It's basically about a guy who, how do I even explain this? It's about a guy who, is testing his ability to fluctuate in weight. So he'll step on a scale with nothing in his pockets, nothing going on, and he'll step on the scale and he'll be the same exact weight. And he'll put 5-pound weights in his pocket on both sides, and he'll step on the scale and he'll be the exact same weight as he was before without having anything in his pockets. And eventually his weight starts to slowly decrease and decline, and he knows that something is going on with his body. He just can't figure out what it is. There's also a relationship between the him and the town outcasts, which are two lesbians that live in the town, and they're in this relationship. They run a restaurant, and they're very outcasted by this society, and they end up becoming really good friends. And it's that story. It's very fucking weird. If I told you the ending of this book, you would be like, what the fuck? I can't even, I wish I could spoil it for you because I'm still asking myself, why did I read that? And what did I read? Because it was so weird. It was so weird. I thought about never reading a Stephen King book after that, but I want to give him a try with something that's more well-known and well-loved, because that just wasn't it. It just wasn't it. It wasn't it. Okay, moving on. All right, up next we have Anna K by Jenny Lee. I did not like this book. This is an Anna Karenina retelling, and maybe because I never read Anna Karenina, I just didn't understand the purpose of this book, but it just felt so busy. It's very Gossip Girl style, Crazy Rich Asian style, where it has a ton of perspectives and you're following all these different lives and they all interconnect in different ways, and that's really cool. I like books like that most of the time, but this book just wasn't it. I was expecting to follow this love story between Anna Kay and the bad boy after she's already been in a relationship with someone else for a really long time, and she's questioning her relationship and whether or not she wants to see that relationship through or try something new. And I thought that I was really going to be following that throughout the story, and I didn't get to follow that at all, it felt like, until the very end of the book. And I just thought there was way too many perspectives, way too many chapters about people I didn't care about, and too much information that just didn't end up mattering in the end. And the ending of this book made the book so not worth it that it wasn't even fun. I almost regret reading this book. I would be a much happier person if I know that I didn't read it because I just didn't like it. It was not good. I ended up giving this book a 2-star. I remember reading the first half of it via, physically reading it, and then I had to put it down and wait for myself to get the audiobook in through the library, which was a 4 or 5 week hold because I couldn't physically read it any longer. I picked up the audiobook thinking maybe it was just me, maybe it was my reading experience. If I listen to the audiobook, it'll be better. It wasn't. It wasn't, and I don't recommend my experience to you because it just wasn't great. It just wasn't great. I'm gonna move on now. All right, up next we have another book that I DNF'd, and that is Jane Schmilt's The Playground. This book was really weird. It was supposed to be a domestic thriller, and it was definitely more domestic the first 3/4 of the book. I read quite a bit of it. I think I read half to halfway. So the first half of the book was very domestic. There wasn't any thriller aspects going on, but the fact that I knew what was going to happen by the end of this book by only reading half of the book says enough. I got to halfway, I called it quits, I couldn't do anymore, I DNF'd it, and then I went and looked up the spoilers for the ending because I just, I wanted to know how the story played out without actually having to sit through the other half of that book. And it turns out that I knew exactly what was going to happen the entire time, and it was just a waste of time. A waste of time, is that a word? A pointless waste of time, and I don't know why I read it. It just wasn't great. It wasn't great. I didn't like the representation for cheating. I never liked that in books, but I think that this was done really sloppily in my opinion. I didn't like how the attempted sexual assault was talked about in this book at all. And it just wasn't, I just didn't like it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I didn't like it. Let's move on. All right, speaking of Crazy Rich Asians, let's talk about that. Another book that I just didn't freaking like. Again, too many perspectives, way too confusing. I didn't get the love story that I would have wanted in this book, and that is what I wanted. I went in, especially after watching the movie, wanting this wonderful second chance romance and just feeling all the whirlwind of this crazy world that they lived in, but I didn't want all the perspectives that I got. I didn't care. I didn't want to know about her grandma's day. Like, I just didn't care. I didn't care. I didn't like the writing. There were some racial slurs in here. There were some, like, particular slang against gay people that I just didn't love. There were some dogfighting scenes in this, and I just didn't love it. I think that some of the representation in here was really awful. I didn't like how the culture was portrayed, and I'm not sure if that is actual cultural representation that was done in this book, but it just didn't feel very real. And I don't know if that's just me. I'm not Asian, so I don't know. I'm not from this particular culture, so I don't know, but it didn't feel like it was very genuine in regards to the storytelling. So I don't know. I just didn't like it. Please tell me if you guys read this, if you felt differently about this book, because I feel like every time I talk about it and the fact that I didn't love it changed, I just, I feel bad about it. This is probably the book I feel the most bad about saying I didn't like because it's so well loved, but I just don't get it. I don't get it. Somebody explain it to me. All right, up next, we're going to talk about a book that I've talked about disliking on my channel many a times, and I've actually highly contemplated changing my rating on Goodreads for this because I do currently have it rated as a 3-star, but I just don't believe that that's a 3-star book for me, and that's The Falconer by Elizabeth May. This is a fantasy, but honestly, you couldn't pay me enough to tell you what this book is about because I don't remember it. I think I've erased it from my memory because I just didn't like it that much, but I just didn't like it. I think that the first half of the book was quite entertaining and interesting enough for me to physically read it. But once I got to the end, the romance in this book, so unnecessary. I hated every minute of it. Like, I'm a sucker for romance. Sucker for romance. And for me to say that romance wasn't necessary and I wanted to physically vomit in my mouth because of the romance, that's saying something, okay? I just didn't like the writing style. I didn't care for the storyline. I didn't like where the series was going because this is the first book in a series. I will not be picking up the rest of the books for sure. And it just overall wasn't a fantastic book. And, I'm sad about it because I want to read everything I like. Obviously, I don't pick up books that I think I'm going to hate. But this just wasn't it. No, ma'am. No, sir. Give me a new one. All right, and the last book that we're going to talk about is one of the, I think it actually was the first graphic novel that I ever read. And it didn't set me up for success here, and that was Slam. Again, I don't know who the authors are, but I will leave the picture on the screen. I really disliked this graphic novel. I gave this also a 2-star. It was just really bad. It was, the art style was very bright and in your face, and that's not the type of art style I like. I like the very muted, calm, like, more like saturated, like pink saturation or blue saturation or purple saturation that are, mixed into the graphic novel that make it look really nice and calming, but that was just very bright, very in your face. It was about roller derby, which is very grungy and very like down in the dirt kind of thing. I don't know how else to explain that. It was very grungy, and the art style really did reflect that, but I just didn't like this graphic novel. Like, it just wasn't good. It was so confusing. It jumped around so much. The storyline was trash, and it just wasn't worth the read. It's a volume 1, and obviously I will not be continuing on to volume anything because I just didn't freaking like it. It was so bad. So yeah, I feel like terrible about ragging about all these books because I'm sure I know the authors put in a lot of time and effort to make these books good in their personal opinions, but for me they just weren't good. So please let me know down below if you've read any of the books that I talked about, and if you also didn't like them, or if you did, I would love to hear your thoughts on them and why you loved them. But please do let me know because I would love to hear some more perspectives on some of the books that I just didn't love in 2020. But that is the end of this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big old thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and of course leave any comments, questions, suggestions in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!